The first thing Ethan Cole ever learned about the galaxy was this: the powerful always assume ownership. The docking bay on Port Halcyon smelled like overheated circuits and recycled air, the kind that stuck to the back of your throat and reminded you how far you were from open sky. Ethan stood beside his aging freighter, the Rust Line, its hull scratched and sun-faded, a ship that had logged more than 1,000,000 miles across trade routes most pilots avoided. His boots echoed against the metal grating as he faced the merchant's counter, a slab of dull alloy lit by flickering violet panels. 15,000 credits, the merchant rasped, sliding a data pad forward. Or we call it even with something extra. Ethan ran a hand through his sandy hair and glanced at the diagnostic feed hovering above his wrist. Without repairs, the Rust Line wouldn't clear orbit, not safely. He had maybe 48 hours before docking penalties doubled. I don't do extras, Ethan said evenly. The merchant's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. He pressed a control, and a side door slid open with a low hydraulic sigh. She stepped into the light without hesitation. Her skin caught the glow of the neon strips, a muted silver lavender that shimmered softly like moonlight on water. Long dark hair framed a face composed and unreadable, her eyes a calm, luminous blue that didn't dart or plead. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't defiant. She was simply watching. Transfer of ownership, the merchant said. Sign, and she's yours. Worth more than your ship. Ethan didn't look at the merchant. He looked at her. Not at the curve of her silhouette or the way the light traced her outline, but at her posture, straight-backed, chin lifted half an inch too high. Pride, even here. What's your name? He asked. The merchant scoffed. Irrelevant. The woman answered anyway. Serena. Her voice was low, steady, unmistakably intelligent. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. The galaxy ran on contracts and leverage, and people pretending not to see what was right in front of them. He took the stylus. The merchant's grin widened. Ethan signed the transfer, then turned the pad around and slid it back across the counter. She's free, he said. The merchant blinked. You just purchased... No. Ethan cut in, his tone calm but firm. I just paid my debt. He stepped aside, creating space between himself and Serena. Not touching, not claiming, just making room. You're not mine, he told her. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not gratitude, not relief, surprise, as if he had spoken a language she hadn't expected him to know. Around them, the port continued its steady hum. Cargo drones gliding overhead, announcement chimes echoing in standard and 3 other dialects. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moment. Except it wasn't. Serena studied him carefully, as though recalculating something. Most would have chosen differently, she said quietly. Ethan shrugged. Most aren't flying a rust bucket with a busted fuel regulator. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Not because he was charming. Because he hadn't looked at her like merchandise. Ethan gestured toward the exit ramp leading back to his ship. You don't owe me anything, he added. You can walk away right now. She didn't move. Instead, she took one measured step forward, closing the distance by exactly a foot. And if I choose not to, she asked. Ethan met her gaze, steady. Then you're choosing. That's the only part that matters. Above them, the docking bay lights flickered once more, and in that quiet pause between mechanical hums, something unspoken settled into place. Not ownership, not obligation, but the faint beginning of respect. The Rust Line groaned as Ethan powered up the primary systems, the vibration running through the deck plates and into the soles of his boots like a tired animal waking from shallow sleep. Serena stood just inside the cargo bay hatch, her gaze traveling over exposed wiring, patched bulkheads, and the faint smell of machine oil that never quite left the air. The interior lights flickered once before settling into a steady amber glow. She is older than I expected, Serena observed, her fingers hovering an inch above a wall panel without touching it. Ethan snorted softly. She is not old. She is experienced. There is a difference. He crossed the bay and crouched beside an open maintenance hatch, tightening a coupling with a manual wrench instead of relying on the sluggish auto tools. Fuel regulator is running at 60% efficiency. That means we keep our acceleration smooth and do not push her past what she can handle. Serena stepped farther inside, the hatch sealing behind her with a muted hiss. The docking clamps outside released in sequence, metal disengaging from metal. with a low mechanical thud. Through the forward viewport, Port Halcyon's artificial skyline shimmered in bands of blue and white, 12 miles of layered platforms suspended above a gas giant's swirling atmosphere. "You assume I am staying," she said calmly. Ethan rose and moved toward the cockpit, sliding into the pilot's chair with practiced ease. "You are still here," he replied. "That is a start." He keyed the thrusters gently, and the rust line drifted from the docking cradle, nose turning toward open space. No rush. No dramatic launch. Just steady, controlled motion. Serenia took the co-pilot seat without asking permission. The movement was deliberate, confident. Her eyes followed the navigation display as if she recognized the star lanes before they populated on screen. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "Outer Trade Corridor. There is a refinery station about 300 miles from here. I have a friend who owes me a favor and a spare regulator." Ethan glanced at her profile in the soft glow of the console lights. "After that, you can choose your own direction." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just observant. The rust line cleared the port perimeter, and the stars sharpened against the black, distant points of light stretching endlessly in every direction. Serenia studied the control layout with subtle intensity. "Your navigation array is misaligned by half a degree," she said. Ethan frowned. "It has been that way for 6 months. "Yes," she replied, adjusting a small dial near the auxiliary panel with precise fingers. "And it has been inefficient for 6 months." The main display recalibrated, the star map snapping into sharper focus. Ethan stared at it, then at her. "You are not a dock worker," he said. "No," she answered. There was no elaboration. He exhaled slowly. "You could have walked away back there. I am aware." Her hands rested lightly on her knees, posture straight. "But I wish to see what a man does after he refuses ownership." Ethan let that sit for a moment, guiding the ship into a smooth burn that pressed them back into their seats with gentle force. "Usually," he said, eyes forward, "he fixes what is broken and keeps flying." Serenia turned her gaze to the viewport, where the gas giant's storms churned thousands of miles below in bands of copper and gold. "And if what is broken is not a machine?" she asked quietly. Ethan did not answer right away. The engines hummed at a steady pitch, steady as his heartbeat. "Then you start by not treating it like property," he said at last. In the reflection of the glass, he saw her expression soften by a fraction, as if some private calculation had shifted again. The rust line continued forward, small against the vastness, carrying 2 figures who were no longer bound by a contract, only by choice and the silent gravity of something beginning to change. The refinery station came into view 3 hours later, a sprawling ring of steel and light suspended against the velvet black of open space, its perimeter strobes blinking in slow, measured pulses like a heartbeat. Ethan eased the rust line into approach, keeping the burn shallow and controlled. The docking guidance beam latched on with a faint chime. 312 miles traveled, Serenia noted softly, glancing at the navigation log. "Your fuel consumption decreased by 8% after recalibration." Ethan allowed himself a small nod. "I like numbers that move in the right direction." The station rotated slowly beneath them, massive storage tanks reflecting distant starlight in dull silver arcs. Inside the cockpit, the only sounds were the hum of environmental systems and the steady whisper of air circulation. Serenia's gaze drifted over the incoming transmission request flashing on the console. Ethan accepted it. A weathered face filled the display, deep lines carved by years of recycled air and long shifts. "Ethan Cole," the man said with a half grin. "You are either brave or desperate coming back here." "Probably both," Ethan replied evenly. "I need a regulator assembly. Standard size. I can trade labor if credits are tight." The man's eyes shifted briefly, noticing Serenia in the co-pilot seat. His expression sharpened, curious but not intrusive. "Dock at Bay 12, he said. "We will talk." The transmission ended. Ethan guided the rust line through the final approach, magnetic clamps locking into place with a solid metallic thud that reverberated through the hull. The engines powered down gradually, the vibration fading until only silence remained. Serenia unfastened her harness but did not stand. Instead, she studied Ethan with quiet focus. "You trust him," she said. "Enough," Ethan answered. "Trust does not mean certainty. It means calculated risk." She tilted her head slightly, absorbing that. Where I come from, risk is rarely personal. It is measured in fleets and trade sectors. Ethan powered off the last display and rose from the pilot's chair. Where I come from, risk is usually one paycheck away. He moved toward the hatch and paused, glancing back at her. You do not have to come down to the station. Serena stood smoothly, her posture as composed as ever, and missed the opportunity to observe how humans negotiate without leverage. There was the faintest hint of humor in her voice. Ethan exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh. Fair enough. The airlock cycled open, releasing a faint scent of processed oxygen mixed with industrial coolant. The corridor beyond was wide, reinforced with thick beams, yellow guidance lines stretching down its length. Workers in heavy utility suits moved in steady rhythm, hauling equipment and data tablets. No one paid them more than a passing glance. Serena walked beside Ethan, her steps measured, gaze attentive. You could have demanded more, she said quietly as they moved. From the merchant. Demanding is easy, Ethan replied. Living with what you demanded is harder. She considered that in silence. At Bay 12, the station manager waited beside a crate of components, arms folded. His eyes moved from Ethan to Serena again, thoughtful but respectful. You always bring complications with you, he muttered. Ethan shrugged lightly. I prefer to call them upgrades. Serena's luminous blue eyes flicked toward Ethan at that, searching his face for mockery. She found none, only steady calm. For a brief second, something unguarded surfaced in her expression, as though she was beginning to understand that his restraint was not weakness. It was choice. And in a galaxy that measured worth in ownership and power, choice was rarer than gold. The station manager did not waste time with pleasantries. He nudged the crate forward with the toe of his boot, the metal scraping lightly across the docking bay floor. Standard regulator assembly, he said, pulled from a decommissioned hauler. It will fit your rust line, but it will not install itself. Ethan crouched and unlatched the container, inspecting the unit with careful hands. The casing bore scratches, but the internal seals looked intact. It will do, he said. What is the damage? The manager folded his arms. You spend 6 hours in maintenance and recalibrate our outer guidance array. It has been drifting 2 degrees off axis. My crew is overbooked. Ethan nodded once. Fair. Serena watched the exchange without interrupting, her luminous gaze taking in tone and posture more than words. There was no posturing, no hidden leverage, just mutual need measured plainly. As Ethan lifted the regulator, testing its weight, Serena stepped closer to the open crate. Her fingers hovered above the exposed circuitry, not touching, only sensing. The internal flow restrictor is slightly misaligned, she said quietly. The manager raised a brow. You see that from a glance. I hear it, she replied. Ethan looked up. You hear it. Serena inclined her head. Energy patterns produce resonance. This one is strained. The manager studied her more carefully now, curiosity sharpening into interest. You are not cargo, he said flatly. No, Serena answered. There was no pride in it, only fact. Ethan closed the crate and rose. She is with me, he said simply. No explanation. No apology. The manager gave a slow nod, as though recalibrating his own assumptions. 6 hours, he repeated. Bay access is yours. Inside the rust line, Ethan set the regulator on a workbench beneath a strip of bright white task lighting. Tools lined the wall in neat rows, worn but maintained. Serena stood beside him, close enough to observe, far enough to respect his space. He removed the outer casing, exposing the compact lattice of conduits within. You are skilled with machines, she said. Machines are honest, Ethan replied. They break. You fix them. They run again. Serena's eyes tracked the movement of his hands, steady and deliberate. Where I come from, systems are layered with ceremony. Even simple repairs require permission. Ethan tightened a coupling and glanced at her. Sounds inefficient. It is called tradition, she said softly. He paused for a fraction of a second. Tradition should not keep something broken. The words hung between them, heavier than the regulator in his grip. Serena looked down at the exposed assembly, then at him. You believe everything can be fixed? She asked. Ethan wiped his hands on a clean cloth, considering. No, but I believe everything deserves an attempt. Outside the viewport, refinery lights glowed in slow rotation. massive tanks reflecting distant stars. The station hummed with constant industry, thousands of lives moving in quiet coordination. Serenia reached toward the regulator this time and gently adjusted the internal restrictor by a fraction of an inch. The metal responded with a faint, cleaner tone. Ethan looked at her, surprised. "Better," she said. He studied her face, searching for superiority or expectation. He found neither. Only focus. "You could have walked away at the port," he said again, softer this time. Serenia met his gaze. "And missed the chance to see if humans repair more than ships?" she replied. For a moment, the only sound in the cabin was the steady rhythm of circulating air and the distant pulse of the station beyond. Something unspoken settled into place once more, not a contract, not an obligation, but the quiet realization that both of them were testing more than machinery. 6 hours passed in a rhythm of metal and motion. Ethan spent the first 3 recalibrating the refinery station's outer guidance array, his boots anchored to the maintenance ring while the vast curve of the gas giant turned slowly beneath him, storms rolling across its surface like living brushstrokes in copper and amber. Serenia observed from a few feet away, tether secured, her silver lavender skin catching the station lights in quiet glints. The vacuum beyond the shielded field was silent, absolute, a reminder of how small they were suspended 12 miles above churning atmosphere. Ethan adjusted the final alignment node, checking the readout on his wrist display. 2 degrees corrected, he said. "You are steady again." Inside the rust line later, he sealed the new regulator into place, tightening the last bolt with deliberate care. The engine core responded with a smoother hum, the vibration evening out beneath the deck. Serenia closed her eyes briefly, listening. "It is balanced now," she said. Ethan leaned back against the bulkhead, wiping a faint line of grease from his knuckles. "You were right about the restrictor." Serenia stepped closer to the viewport, watching cargo haulers drift past in slow arcs. "There are many things I am right about," she replied, almost teasing. Ethan gave a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. The station manager's payment confirmation chimed through the console. Docking fees cleared. Trade complete. A simple exchange. Yet Serenia's gaze remained distant, thoughtful. "Where I come from," she began slowly. "Systems are designed so that no single person repairs them alone. It reinforces hierarchy. Dependence." Ethan crossed the cabin and keyed the thrusters to idle readiness. "And does it work?" She hesitated. "It maintains order." He studied her reflection in the glass. "Order is not the same as fairness." Serenia turned to face him fully. Now, the steady amber cabin light softened the sharp lines of her posture. "You assume fairness is the goal." "It should be," he said. Silence stretched, not tense but searching. Outside, the docking clamps disengaged with a solid metallic release. The rust line eased backward into open space, nose angling toward the dark corridor between stars. Serenia's voice lowered by a fraction. "You did not ask where I will go after this." Ethan kept his eyes on the controls, guiding the ship into a gentle burn. "You said you wished to observe," he replied. "Observation does not require permanence." "No," she agreed. The engines settled into their new, smoother cadence, the regulator performing as promised. Ethan glanced sideways at her. "If you decide to leave, I will set a course wherever you choose. No questions." Serenia held his gaze for a long moment. In that look was calculation, yes, but also something less guarded. "And if I choose to stay longer?" she asked quietly. Ethan adjusted the throttle, keeping acceleration steady. "Then we fly until you are done watching." The stars ahead elongated slightly as they entered sustained thrust, light bending into narrow lines against the black. Serenia turned back to the viewport, hands clasped loosely behind her back. "Most beings," she said, almost to herself, "would attempt to secure advantage from proximity to someone like me." Ethan did not respond immediately. He simply monitored the instruments, listening to the steady rhythm of a ship that no longer strained. "I am not most beings," he said at last. Serenia's reflection in the glass revealed the faintest softening at the corners of her eyes. Not surrender, not yet trust, but recognition. The rust line moved forward into open space, no longer anchored to the station, carrying with it a repaired engine and a question neither of them had fully answered. What happens when a choice becomes more than observation? The rust line maintained a steady burn for nearly 2 hours before Ethan reduced the throttle and allowed the ship to drift on momentum alone. The stars ahead settled back into sharp, distant points of light, no longer stretched by acceleration. Inside the cabin, the new regulator held its rhythm, a low, even hum that felt almost like breathing. Serenia stood near the galley console, studying a holographic projection of the surrounding trade lanes. "You altered course," she said without looking up. Ethan leaned against the doorway, arms loosely crossed. "There is a minor colony station about 800 miles off our original path. Agricultural supply hub. Nothing impressive." "Then why divert?" she asked. He hesitated for half a second. "They have been flagged for resource shortage. I have extra water filters in the cargo hold. It is easier to drop them off than to pretend I did not see the alert." Serenia deactivated the projection and turned toward him. "You will not be compensated." "Probably not." He shrugged lightly. "Not everything needs to be." A quiet understanding flickered across her features, though she masked it quickly. "In my world, assistance is strategic," she said. "Aid secures alliances. Influence. Leverage." Ethan stepped into the cockpit and began programming the new coordinates. "That sounds exhausting," he replied. "Helping because it helps is simpler." The ship adjusted course with a subtle shift, thrusters engaging just enough to redirect their path. Serenia moved closer to the viewport, watching a faint cluster of station lights grow gradually brighter against the darkness. "You behave as though your choices carry no consequence," she said. "Every choice carries consequence," Ethan answered. "I just prefer consequences I can live with." She folded her hands behind her back, posture straight but less rigid than before. "You do not ask who I am," she said quietly. Ethan kept his eyes on the navigation display. "You will tell me when you want to. And if I never do, then I will still know you fixed my regulator and recalibrated my navigation array." His tone was steady, not dismissive, simply factual. Serenia studied him, as if he were an equation refusing to resolve. "You are aware," she said slowly, "that proximity to someone of status could alter your circumstances significantly." Ethan allowed himself a faint smile. "My circumstances are a ship that runs, a path that is clear, and the freedom to choose where I go. I am not looking to upgrade beyond that." The colony station now filled more of the viewport, a modest ring structure with rotating greenhouse modules glowing soft green. It was smaller than the refinery, less polished, but alive with quiet effort. Serenia's voice softened. "Where I come from, worth is measured publicly. Titles, holdings, visibility." Ethan reduced speed as they approached docking range. "Where I come from, worth is measured privately. Whether you can look at yourself at the end of the day." Silence settled again, but it was no longer analytical. It was reflective. The rust line eased into approach, docking clamps extending to meet the modest station's guidance rails. As the magnetic locks engaged with a solid click, Serenia exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly. "You choose the smaller path," she said. Ethan powered down the engines to idle. "No," he replied gently. "I choose the path that lets me sleep." In the reflection of the viewport, Serenia's luminous blue eyes held a new light. Not curiosity alone, but the beginning of something far more dangerous to hierarchy than rebellion. Respect. The colony station greeted them with softer lighting than the refinery, panels glowing in muted greens and warm whites instead of industrial blues. Through the viewport, Ethan could see the greenhouse modules rotating slowly, long rows of crops suspended behind reinforced glass, leaves brushing faintly against the interior walls as artificial gravity shifted. The docking clamps settled with a steady metallic grip, and the rust-line systems powered down to a patient idle. "They are smaller than the refinery," Serenia observed, her voice low. "They are feeding people instead of fueling ships," Ethan replied. "Different priorities." He moved to the cargo hold and unlatched the storage crate containing the spare water filters. The metal lid lifted with a quiet creak. Serenia stepped closer, watching him hoist the box onto a portable lift. "You will leave them without ceremony," she said. "Ceremony wastes oxygen," he answered lightly. The station's airlock cycled open, releasing a faint scent of soil and moisture, a sharp contrast to the dry, metallic air of larger trade hubs. Inside the corridor, a handful of workers in simple utility suits paused at the sight of visitors. Their expressions carried fatigue more than suspicion. Ethan nodded once in greeting and pushed the crate forward. Spare filtration units, he said. Rated for small-scale hydro systems. They should last you a few seasons. A woman with weathered hands stepped forward, scanning the contents with a handheld device. Her eyes widened slightly as the readings confirmed quality. What do you want in return? She asked. Ethan shook his head. Nothing. Just keep your crops alive. The woman studied him for a long moment, as if searching for hidden terms. Finding none, she inclined her head in quiet gratitude. Serena watched the exchange with unguarded focus. There was no negotiation, no leverage, no expectation of influence. Only an offering and its acceptance. As they walked back toward the rust line, Serena slowed her pace. You have altered their survival odds, she said. Yes. Without securing alliance. Without requesting loyalty. Ethan paused near the airlock threshold and looked at her. If they survive, that is enough. Her luminous blue eyes held his gaze, searching for calculation. She found none. Only calm conviction. Back inside the ship, the hatch sealed behind them with a soft hiss. Ethan returned to the cockpit and began preparing for departure, fingers moving across controls with practiced ease. Serena remained standing behind him, hands loosely clasped. In my world, she said carefully, a ruler is judged by how effectively they consolidate power. Ethan adjusted the navigation vector. Sounds lonely. She considered that. It can be. The engines engaged once more, the regulator maintaining its smooth cadence. The colony station drifted behind them, shrinking against the dark. Serena stepped closer to the viewport, watching until the green glow of the greenhouses became a faint speck. You choose influence without ownership, she said quietly. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I choose decency, he replied. Silence followed, deeper than before. Not analytical. Not testing. Reflective. Serena's posture shifted, shoulders easing by a fraction, as though some internal guard had lowered. If you knew who I truly am, she began, then stopped. Ethan did not turn around. You would still be someone who fixed my regulator, he said gently. Her reflection in the glass revealed a subtle change, something resolute forming beneath the surface. The stars ahead stretched wide and unclaimed, and for the first time since stepping into the docking bay on Port Halcyon, Serena did not look like an observer. She looked like someone standing at the edge of a decision. The rust line had been in open space for less than 40 minutes when the proximity alarm pulsed once, low and restrained. Not a threat signal, but a presence alert. Ethan's eyes flicked to the forward display. 3 vessels had dropped from higher orbit, their silhouettes sharp and symmetrical, hulls reflecting starlight in polished arcs. They did not broadcast weapon signatures. They did not need to. Their formation alone spoke of precision and authority. Serena went still behind him. Not tense. Not afraid. Still. Ethan adjusted the sensor gain, studying the transponder codes as they began to resolve. You expecting company? He asked evenly. Serena stepped forward into the glow of the console. For a fraction of a second, the soft lavender of her skin seemed to brighten, as if responding to something unseen. Yes, she said quietly. The 3 ships altered vector with effortless grace, forming a loose triangle around the rust line at a measured distance of 2 miles. A transmission request blinked on the screen, priority level marked in gold. Ethan glanced at Serena before accepting it. The cockpit filled with the image of a tall figure clad in silver and deep indigo, insignia lining the collar in intricate patterns. Behind the figure stood a wide chamber of glass and light, unmistakably ceremonial. Your Highness, the figure said, bowing his head. Not to Ethan, to Serena. The word hung in the cabin like a shift in gravity. Ethan did not move. He did not turn dramatically. He simply kept one hand resting on the console. Serena stepped forward until she stood beside him, posture straight, chin lifted by exactly half an inch. The quiet observer was gone. In her place stood something unmistakable. You were not instructed to retrieve me, Serena said, her voice calm, but carrying an authority Ethan had not heard before. We were instructed to ensure your safety, the figure replied. The council has grown concerned. Ethan let out a slow breath through his nose. Princess, he said softly, testing the word without accusation. Serena's luminous blue eyes shifted to him, not defensive, not ashamed. Steady. Serena Valor, she said. Heir to the Valor Accord. Primary voice on trade and reform. The title settled into the space between them. Ethan absorbed it the way he absorbed sensor readings or engine vibrations. Fact, not spectacle. The silver-clad figure's gaze flicked briefly toward Ethan now, assessing. You are in the presence of sovereign lineage, he said, tone formal. Ethan met the image without flinching. I am aware. Serena's eyes lingered on Ethan, searching for change. For ambition. For resentment. He gave her none. Only the same steady composure he had offered in a docking bay under flickering neon. I was never in danger, she told the transmission calmly. I chose to travel. A pause. With a civilian freighter pilot, the figure added carefully. Serena did not correct him. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. If she wishes to leave, I will set course wherever you direct, he said. No demand. No claim. The silence that followed was heavier than any engine hum. Serena looked at the polished ships holding position outside, then at the man who had never once tried to secure advantage from her presence. Stand by, she told the transmission. The channel muted. In the reflection of the viewport, Ethan saw it clearly now. Not just status, not just power, a decision forming. And for the first time, the galaxy was not waiting on fleets or councils. It was waiting on her. The three sovereign vessels held their formation in perfect silence, their polished hulls reflecting the faint glow of distant stars. Inside the rust line, the muted transmission channel waited for Serena's command, the cockpit lit in soft amber and cool blue. Ethan remained seated, one hand resting loosely on the console, the other near the throttle, but not touching it. He did not rush her. He did not speak first. Serena stood beside him, shoulders squared, the weight of lineage settling over her like an invisible mantle. Yet there was something different now, something not defined by council chambers or ceremonial halls. She reactivated the channel. The silver-clad official appeared once more, posture rigid, gaze respectful but urgent. Your Highness, he said, the council requests your immediate return. Negotiations are pending, and your absence is being interpreted as instability. Serena's luminous blue eyes flicked briefly toward Ethan, then back to the image. Instability, she repeated, tasting the word as though it were foreign. You have 3 escort ships positioned 2 miles from a civilian freighter, she continued calmly. Does that appear unstable to you? The official hesitated. Protocol requires. Protocol, she interrupted gently, exists to preserve order, not to prevent growth. Silence followed. Not defiance. Not rebellion. Just a shift. Serena stepped closer to the viewport, watching the 3 vessels holding formation with disciplined patience. Inform the council, she said evenly, that I am safe. I am observing trade routes firsthand. I will return when I have concluded my assessment. The official's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Assessment of what, Your Highness? Serena did not look at him when she answered. She looked at Ethan. A value, she said. The transmission ended. Outside, the 3 ships maintained position for several long seconds. Then, one by one, they altered course, engines flaring in synchronized arcs of light before fading into the dark. The rust line was alone again. Ethan exhaled. Slowly, adjusting a minor course correction that did not need adjusting. That seemed important, he said quietly. Serena remained by the viewport, hands clasped lightly behind her back. It was, she replied. He waited, but she did not elaborate immediately. Finally, she turned to face him fully, the authority still present but softened by something far more human. If I return unchanged, she said, then everything I observe here becomes anecdote. A curiosity, a story about a primitive pilot with inconvenient morals. Ethan gave a faint, almost amused smile. I have been called worse. Serena's lips curved slightly, but her eyes were serious. If I return altered, she continued, then systems shift. Traditions bend. Ownership is questioned. She took one measured step toward him. You never asked what I could offer you. Ethan met her gaze without hesitation. I never needed to. A quiet settled between them, deeper than the hum of engines, steadier than the drift of stars. Serena studied him for a long moment, as if committing something to memory. You freed me when you believed I had nothing, she said softly. That is the only reason your actions matter. Ethan leaned back in his chair, guiding the rust line into a smooth forward burn. So what now, princess? He asked, the title spoken without reverence or mockery. Serena looked out at the vast stretch of unclaimed space ahead, starlight reflecting in her eyes like scattered gold. "Now," she said, her voice calm and resolute, "we continue." The engines answered with a steady, balanced hum as the rust line moved forward into open space, no longer carrying a hidden heir or an observer in disguise, but two individuals bound by a choice neither contract nor crown could override. And in the silent wake of three retreating warships, the smallest vessel in the sector carried something far more disruptive than power. It carried dignity.